This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
As Christians, we know that evil is real. We're told in the book of Ephesians that we wrestle not against human opponents, flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and cosmic rulers over this present darkness. But some of their agents do happen to be human, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Our guest is a documentary filmmaker. He's the man who produced the film The Smiley Face Killers. He's also an author. Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11 and the New World Order, Children of the Beast, Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception in the West Memphis 3 murders. And the topic of tonight's conversation, his new book, Global Death Cult, The Order of Nine Angles, Atomwaffen, and the Slaughter of the Innocents. It is our honor to welcome back to the program for the first time in way too long, William Ramsey. William, thanks for joining us tonight.
Derek, great to be with you again. Thanks for the invitation.
It's been since you were out here in the Ozarks back, 4 years ago, I think, since we last talked?
Seems like it. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, we discussed
time is fast.
The Smiley Face Killers, but this new book that you've got is, frankly, it's about groups that I'd not heard of before. The Order of Nine Angles almost sounds like a name that would be invented for some supernatural crime thriller or something. But this is real, and there are security types, law enforcement types who take these guys and Atomwaffen very seriously.
Yeah, and they should. I think very wisely they should take them very seriously. I think they're both new groups, and that's probably why I didn't know much about them either, really. I think somebody tried to get the point across to me a while back, but really Igor Sarsky was the guy who reached out to me really just last year, and then I kind of had to play catch up and try to figure out what these groups are. But they really were groups that have shown up through the internet over the last, at least the Order of Nine Angles was in the early 80s, and Atomwaffen's really not that old, maybe 5-6 years old. But they've been in the news. Both groups have been in the news recently.
So what is the Order of Nine Angles?
Well, it is a group that started out of England, and they were pre-internet. They were a group that was a satanic group, and really, it was one guy by the name of David Myatt, who was probably the central figure, if not the only figure, who was writing these kind of missives and sending them out through P.O. boxes, etc. And their ideas, they had some very intense ideas. They distinguished themselves from other satanic groups in their attitude towards what they call culling, which is a husbandry term, like when you go out and kill off the sheep or something, but their attitude was towards human beings. So their original documentation, which I include quite a bit of it in my book, they talk about how they distinguish themselves from people like the Temple of Set or Michael Aquino in their attitude towards murdering human beings. So that's kind of what it came to my attention, because I had been doing all this research into what's known as the Smiley Face Killers, and where young men were this phenomenon of young men disappearing and being found in water at a later date, typically did not drown. So this was kind of something that overlapped. So once I found out about this, probably of November of 2020, I really started, actually it was August, I really started researching. So I went back through and read all the original documentation and got as much as I could, much information as I could. And what I found was, I thought, really important, and thus I compiled it into this book, Global Death Cult.
So the Order of Nine Angles considers the Temple of Set and other satanic groups to be not serious when it comes to the real practice of human sacrifice.
Correct. So there's one section, chapter 3, are the satanic letters of Anton Long, which consist of writing which is suspected to be of David Myatt and the Temple of Set, including some correspondence between them and Michael Aquino, who was the head of the Temple of Set, formerly associated with the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. And the arguments are that he was kind of Myatt in the Order of Nine Angles. They're calling them posers, I think. Posers in the sense that they weren't serious about killing people. And that's really this group in its formation. They have a kind of a septenary system, which is a 7-part system. And the 5th part is to ascend up to the 7th part of that system. The 5th part, you have to find what they call an offer, which is a German term for a sacrifice, and complete a sacrifice to go up that the 7-fold way.
So who is this guy, David Myatt?
Well, it's a really good question, because he was somebody who came up through the far right of the UK and was really a National Socialist. He was kind of unique among the National Socialists in that he was intelligent and university educated. So he started compiling all of this stuff. I think he was a very frustrated National Socialist that they were unable to get much public support in the UK. And it's not surprising considering that they had gone through World War II, but he had been in this kind of UK Nazi underground and started and concurrently was experimenting in the occult. He had gone through kind of a Crowley group, an OTO group, but then I think he started really writing these missives, really only kind of pamphlets, like 3 or 4 page pamphlets, but then they compiled in time and really kind of coalesced into different books. One is The Sinister Tradition, the Black Book of Satan. So these were the early books that came together. And really, you can see that he had a list of, like, he was sending these out on photocopies back in the 80s and 90s. But he was really kind of the central figure for the formation and ideology of the Order of Nine Angles, which has really morphed into the present. But pre-internet, I think he was really pulling information from his experiences reading with Crowley and kind of other occult topics.
So these guys came to your attention through your research into the Smiley Face Killers or Aleister Crowley, or both?
No, the Smiley Face Killers. So somebody reached out to me and said, hey, you should look into this group, the Order of Nine Angles. And I've done 3 interviews with this guy, Igor Sarsky, who did a lot of research into the ONA. And I include his kind of 2 of our conversations in the appendix to the book, because I think they're very important because they go into their kind of the deeper aspects of their ideology. But it's very interesting because when it came to my attention, there were these other current events that involved the ONA. There was a guy by the name of William von Nudegem in Toronto who was out at night and slit some guy's throat, came up behind him. So it seems like, and there was actually, you can go see his YouTube video where he's doing an ONA chant. So it's really something else. Like, you can actually see him practicing the ONA in real time.
So what are the beliefs? What are the tenets of the organization? What is it that they believe? What are they trying to accomplish?
Well, I think they have a long-term goal. So like I said, they have the sevenfold way. But the Order of Nine Angles is this idea. There's 9 angles that involve the moon, Jupiter, Mars, but a gate and stargate. So they have, and a dark gate. So they have this idea of a terrestrial realm and then kind of like a dark spiritual realm. And they want to presence these dark forces. They actually call them the 21 dark gods. Supposedly, Myatt found, during his travels, he was fortunate enough to be well-traveled, but during his travels, one of his travels to the Middle East, he supposedly said he found a manuscript and that those were the core 21 dark gods that they were trying to presence from the old kind of ancient Sumerian stuff. So they tried to go as far, like all the other occultists, they're all trying to go back as far as possible into kind of ancient Sumer and the dark gods of the Middle East. So that's what they're trying to do, is presence these dark gods. That's their whole idea. And so they do all these rituals to that end. But it also involves kind of some other standard kind of Satanism and sex magic and things like that. But I think as far as their long-term goals, they have this idea of kind of a dark kind of political system on 300 years where they will kind of advance through to the stars. So they kind of have a space opera idea, kind of like Scientology or something, where they will attain and infiltrate political systems and eventually get rid of all the people they don't want and take over become a kind of galactic empire.
So the ultimate level then is that they actually become the gods that, it seems a lot of pagan religions ultimately have that as the goal, that ye shall be as gods. Who are these dark gods? Do they name them?
Yeah, so they have like all these names: Noctulius, Nithra, Shugara, Aosoth, Anazagan. So they have, and then they have these sigils for each of those dark gods. But they also tried to distinguish them from Lovecraft But so they say they're actually real gods of legend, but they seem very Lovecraftian to me. But it's kind of one of those things where you can tell that Myatt or whoever formulated the ONA doctrines has just like Crowley, really, when he was doing the OTO, he's taken in elements from a variety of different traditions.
Yeah. I've had my head deep into Mesopotamian cosmology for the last 5 years, pretty much, and I've not heard a single one of those names that you just rattled off. So, yeah,
that's the whole thing. Is like there's no evidence to actually verify that these are real. So it's somewhat telling, I think.
Well, yeah, on the one hand, but on the other, these entities lie, so it may well be that they're real and just making up names. I just have this mental image of, in the spirit realm of these things kind of throwing out names that they're making up on the spot and just laughing hysterically as these dupes fall for it. The tragedy is that these guys take it really seriously, which includes harming other people. They in your book, Global Death Cult, you mentioned that there was something that Myatt seemed to be following, a Hellenic ethos that he perceived in Homer's Odyssey and Iliad.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he took in these kind of ideas, these esoteric elements from the Hellenic tradition, and integrated them into this. So that was one part of it. He considers himself somebody who's involved in translating, classical documents, including I think it was Corpus Hermeticum. I think was the Greek document. But so he's integrated that, and a lot of kind of Nazism. Like they consider the year Fian or year of rejoice. There's all kinds of weird terminology in this group, but they time their beginnings from 1889, which is the birth of Hitler. So there's definitely Nazism involved in this kind of, and I think that their idea to culling is an evolutionary impulse. So they are culling what they believe people who should go and be, put down for the betterment and the advancement of humanity. So I think that's very much in the kind of Nazi tradition.
Well, at the end of the day, that's eugenics, which was really originated here in the United States and was carried back to Germany by some of their scientists in the 1920s and 30s. But it's a very old practice. I mean, the whole motto of the global eugenics congresses that took place 100 years ago was self-directed evolution, which is a motto adopted by many in the transhumanist movement today. It's just transhumanism carried to its most logical end.
Yeah, I think so. I think that these guys believe that their culling practices are advancing, they call it aeonic change. It's advancing this change towards the new aeon that they want by culling people. Culling the people they consider unfit.
Myatt started this back in the 80s, and we're just now learning about this group some 35, 40 years later. Why did it take so long for them to come to the attention of researchers and law enforcement?
That's a great question. I think it's because originally it had nothing to do with the internet. Then the internet era kind of came to the fore in the 90s and started dispersing it. But really within the last 2 or 3 years, there have been cases that have surfaced this doctrine. So you just have this corpus that's really grown into 1,000 pages from the original manuscripts, Naos, Black Book of Satan, etc. But there was that one case of William von Neudegen. There was Ethan Meltzer, who contacted ONA groups and said that he was going to betray his unit, his military unit that was going to be in Turkey, so that they could have a fake terrorist thing. He's actually in the same jail as Ghislaine Maxwell right now, hasn't been tried yet. And then the Atomwaffen popped up, and there was 5 deaths associated with Atomwaffen. He started in 2015, but the ideas that Myatt put together, these kind of a mix of occultism and Nazism, found their affinity within Atomwaffen. So you'll see within their social media, within the stuff they're reading ONA doctrines, and Atomwaffen, very aggressive, and they were involved in these massive SWAT, like the biggest swatting campaign, which is where you call the police and say, there's a problem at 123 Smith Street, and then the police show up thinking there's some kind of criminal act going on. But they did it to the head of the Homeland Security Department. Oh. Homeland Security, I think it was Christian Nugent. I can't remember her last name. But I mean, so that really, I think, and some other researchers have looked into them as well. There's other known journalists, and they go, guys, this ONA doctrines have now permeated the far right in the U.S., the UK, and they've spread. They have this idea, like you could call it a kind of a cell or like an intelligence cell or a communist cell. They call them Nexions. So he or Myatt devised this kind of idea where this small group of people would be a spiritual group that would be a kind of an outpost of the ONA, and they're called Nexions. But they started popping up all over the world. So you have these Nexions in almost 25 countries, and I show that in my Chapter 7, Global Reach of the Order of Nine Angles, that they showed up in the UK, Australia, Brazil, Egypt, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Iceland, Spain, South Africa. So now because of the internet and global communications, this group has really spread. I don't think they're a huge group, but I think they're very aggressive and lethal. Their sensibilities are lethal. So I think that's why it's just kind of surfaced now, is that people have been caught by the police and have had their affiliation to the ONA revealed or exposed.
You mentioned Ethan Meltzer, a fellow who's in the same facility as Ghislaine Maxwell. What military unit was he with, and what did he do that got him in trouble?
So what Meltzer was doing, he was I'm trying to remember. I think he was from Tennessee, and he was in Italy. He was in, I can't remember what branch of the military he was, but he was supposedly in contact, according to, it's in my book, according to the filing from the U.S. Attorney's Office, he was in contact and was trying to betray his own group. And it's interesting, too, because you can find you can actually see this online, where there's a picture of Meltzer with the Sinister Tradition, which is like one of the notorious books of the ONA. So there's a picture of that and him on some of these, like it was, let's see, 2020. He was 22. He was, I don't know what U.S. Army unit he was, but the Department of Justice said that he was trying to facilitate a mass casualty event on his Army unit in Italy in May 2020. So these are fairly recent, right before or during, actually, COVID.
Huh. Now, another fellow you write about in the book, Global Death, called Ryan Fleming. He's another one who's come to the attention of security services and law enforcement. What is his deal?
Well, that's another one. Like, so you have this guy coming out of the UK, and I could show that he was in communication with other members of this group, but he was also kind of in the far right. And I think it's important to, like, one of the concepts that Myatt inculcated into the ONA was this concept of insight roles, where you would infiltrate certain groups and learn from them. So you'd still be an ONA member, but you can infiltrate the far right or whatever and actually try to manipulate them or influence them to fulfill ONA objectives. So a lot of these guys, like Ryan Fleming, was interesting because I think he was an ONA member before he joined the far right in the UK. But I think he was all over the place. He writes his own things. He has his own he writes under the pseudonym A.A. Moraine, but I think he got arrested for repeated relations with underage girls, but he also was part of his own, like I talked about earlier, this idea of a Nexion. He was part of a Nexion in Yorkshire called the Dracon Covenant. So he was writing all the stuff in the Martinet Press, who just popped up recently, and another ONA. So there's a lot going on. There was, even after I published this book, there's been 2 deaths in Russia associated with the ONA within the last couple of weeks, actually. So there's a lot going on. And Fleming, I think, has written, and I include in the book, like, these guys are talking about going into cities late at night and committing crimes and trying to get away without getting caught. So really dark. And he was part of what I think the far right group Fleming was part of was called National Action.
So Nexion is just a short form of connection.
Well, I think that they would say it's NEXION, and I think it's like Nexus. So it's like a nexus between the kind of terrestrial world and this kind of dark spiritual world.
Unlike other far-right groups, though, these guys are motivated by an occult belief and in service to these 21 dark gods.
Yes, that was the original kind of doctrines of the ONA. So they are trying to presence these dark gods. And Fleming's a perfect example. I think you can still go to his website right now, and you can see him doing these kind of strange rituals. They're not showing him doing it, but he has all of these kind of like a temple or a setup where he's trying. He has the same names of these same dark gods, some of which I listed off, where he's trying to like presence them or something very odd like that. So that's his. I remember what's his runewithawordpress.com, I think is his website.
And by presencing, you mean summon them and make them manifest.
Yeah, well, it gets pretty deep, but they talk about presencing, but then the presencing, I think, is they're being possessed by them. So they become vehicles for that, for the dark god. The
goal being then to execute whatever the dark god's will is, with the ultimate goal being ruling the world.
I think that's eventually what their original plan was. They think they're at the third stage right now of the LNA, where they're comfortable with what they've done originally of compiling the original documentation. The second part was supposedly expansion, and now it's infiltration, I think is what their third stage is, according to that. And it's very odd because David Might's been allowed to enter the U.S. Like, I think he came out to California for a meeting of all these groups. But it's very odd because it wasn't until within the last year that these guys came on the radar of the federal government here. So now the ONA is being bandied about with Department of Homeland Security and some other groups, and they're writing about them as a danger. But they were flying under the radar for decades.
Well, why is that? Was it just the fact that most of their work was pre-internet era, or just small numbers, or why didn't anybody pay attention to these guys?
I mean, I think it really was that they didn't have any overt crimes that could be tied to them. And so now with Atomwaffen being wrapped up, I'm not wrapped up, but most of the leaders have gone to jail, that they realized that this was a much bigger problem. And I think also it's a very unique phenomenon. I don't know if the criminologists caught up with this kind of strange occult group that operates on the internet internationally and has PGP, pretty good privacy. They're communicating using encryption, and they didn't really understand them. So I think that was another thing. They didn't understand their lethality, and that's why it took a while to kind of figure it out.
How much of that might be due to what you found when you were researching Abomination, the book about the West Memphis 3 case, and Damien Eccles, the fact that law enforcement just doesn't seem to get occult crime?
No, I agree with that too. I mean, that's part of the larger issue, right? So the FBI landing report, there's no such thing as occult crime. Which, I mean, I think you can obviously show through proof and factual evidence that there is occult motivations in certain crimes, Richard Ramirez and some of these other, Damien Eccles probably. So I think you're right. It might just be a kind of a blinders on kind of federal policing.
Has that situation changed at all? Gotten any better? I mean, the West Memphis 3 murders were, 20 years ago? I've forgotten what year those took place.
1993. It's almost 30 years.
So in the last 30 years, have you detected or seen any indication that law enforcement is becoming more sensitive or more aware of the reality of occult crime?
No. So it doesn't look good. So I haven't really seen it. It is interesting that the Congress has actually had some hearings that involve the ONA. So the Order of Nine Angles is on the radar of some of these groups, and because there's this kind of current push against white supremacy, I think the ONA is now on the radar where it wasn't. But I don't know if the totality of their understanding of what the ONA is. I don't think they really go all the way and say that it's an occult group, which it is, which it's obviously an occult group. So they just see it as a white supremacy group. But
I didn't mean to laugh out there inappropriately, but it just struck me as so typical of where America is right now in 2021 that being involved in the occult, even if the occult is a violent cult serving a dark god, that's okay as long as you're not a white supremacist. That's what shows up on law enforcement radar. The fact that you're following a cult leader who is advocating culling the weak and useless humans, actually murdering them in service of these 21 dark gods. Okay, well, that's fine. They're just probably, LARPers,
Yeah, well, I think that's not true. I mean, if you look at some of these recent deaths, the Russian kind of things, you don't know how many people they've actually successfully. I mean, according to their own doctrines, you're supposed to kill them or cull them without getting caught. So that's the whole gist, is like, you're not supposed to do it openly. It's supposed to be like a secret murder. So how many possible things that people have seen, whether it's a car crash, a drowning, anything, is actually something other than that. So, I mean, that's really kind of what caught my eye about this whole group after studying the smiley face killers, because their doctrines fit right into that whole phenomenon. And this group and other people have discovered that on some of their main websites of the ONA, they're using a smiley face. So they have that same kind of symbolic theme that I researched in these other things, where they're using the same graphic of a smiley face. Why is that?
So this is where Igor, and forgive me, his last name again is
Sarsky.
Igor Sarsky reached out to you and said, "Hey, you might want to look to see if there are any connections between these two groups, or does he believe that there are connections between the smiley face murders and the Order of Nine Angles?"
Well, the ideology of the ONA, there's no proof. I don't have any proof, but the ideology of the ONA fits into the smiley face killers phenomenon, in my opinion. But there's not a lot of obvious stuff. But if you look, like, they have this kind of idea of water deaths. There's a very much water theme of this group, and they clearly have external documents that you can read, but they clearly have stuff that's either in an oral tradition, meaning it's spoken among themselves, or there are secret manuals that I haven't read. So it's kind of like almost Damien Eccles, where he has other books that aren't public, Mind Magic and stuff like that I haven't read. But I think the ONA is similar in that regard. So some of their secret doctrines they're not known to the public, not known to me at least. So it might just be something that's only for initiates that they know about.
This is crossing over into some of the research that I've been doing recently. I've got a book coming out in November called The Second Coming of Saturn. And one of the lines of research led me to northern Mesopotamia and the ancient Hurrian people, Hurrian, who show up in the Bible as the Horites. They had a temple at a city in northern Syria called Urkesh. And researchers there, the archaeologists who excavated the site, which sadly they had to stop in 2011 because of the Syrian civil war, it has a drain leading from a platform down to an area called the Abi, A-B-I. And scholars have found that is probably the word that predates the Sumerian Abzu, or abyss, but also the Hebrew word Ov, which shows up in our Bible usually as the word medium, like the Ov of Endor, the medium of Endor. It refers to a ritual pit, a necromantic ritual pit. Well, the one at Urkesh is about 45 feet deep, and they've only been able to excavate the first 20 or so because of concerns about the integrity of the walls. But this drain leading the water down, according to Hurrian texts that have been found from the later Hittite kingdom, refer to this as like a divine watercourse of the river that leads to the netherworld. And where I'm going with this is this connection to the chief god or the father god of the Hurrians, Kumarbi, who is the equivalent of Saturn and Kronos in the Greek pantheon, who was banished to the netherworld by, in the fake news pagan mythological version, banished to the netherworld by his son, the storm god, who took over, whether it's Zeus, Jupiter, or Teshub in the Hurrian pantheon. Same story, just different names. But that's actually a twisted retelling of what happened in Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were fair and took wives of any they chose. And for that, God sent the flood of Noah and then banished these entities to the netherworld. Those are the spirits that are in prison that Jesus preached to or proclaimed to in 1 Peter 3. So you've got this idea and this theme that keeps recurring in the Bible, but also in the pagan cosmologies of deities who are on the far side of a body of water or under the water. There's a reference in the book of Job about spirits that are under the water, Rephaim that are under the water, and the water in the Bible representing chaos or the abyss or the bottomless pit. So you get this idea here that there may be some kind of odd connection that's being.
Yes, I mean, if you have you read the book, because I include a lot of the stuff about their kind of mythos and fables about these beings being in the water and things being thrown in the water. There's definitely an occult element, and they have this kind of concept of the tricycle, which represents the god of the underworld, represented by what's the Greek god? Who was the
Poseidon?
God? Neptune?
Poseidon.
Yeah, Poseidon.
Yeah.
Or Neptune, right? And so Neptune they represent, the ONA is on the side of Neptune to take over from where the old god Zeus was, right? So
right.
They represent that element of, and it actually goes into kind of Nazism too, which is like this whole idea of the Black Sun, where they're from, they're part of the chaotic tradition. So they're actually trying to create change through chaos. So it fits into some of that. It depends how deep it is. Like I don't know anybody from the ONA, but their doctrines may be such that they believe that they're something to do with water and placating these old dark gods through water or something. Yeah, it's not implausible to me.
Well, I want to emphasize for people wondering here, tricycle. What's a tricycle got to do with this dark god of the underworld? No, it's tri and then sickle as in a scythe, which was the symbol used. That was the tool used in the Greek and Roman myth by Kronos or Saturn to castrate the sky god, Uranus in the Greek myth and Kalos in the Roman myth, to castrate the sky god. In the Hurrian myth, the same thing took place where Kumarbi, who's the equivalent of Saturn and Kronos, castrated the sky god Anu, except he did it with his teeth, which is, yeah. But so the tricycle representing this entity who's in the underworld, but it's fascinating to me that your book is coming out this year. And the reason I wrote my book this year is because, and I probably should have timed it better had it come out early in the year or at the end of last year, because on December 21st, the winter solstice last year, we had the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, two of the brightest and most visible planets in the sky. But Jupiter representing the king of the Roman pantheon, and Saturn representing the old god who'd been dethroned and cast down to the netherworld, Tartarus, or the abyss. And this is sort of a return of the golden age that the Roman poet, who was considered a prophet, Virgil, wrote about in his fourth eclogue. Astrologers and occultists are looking at that. They called it the Great Mutation, because Jupiter and Saturn met within 1/10 of a degree of each other, the closest observable conjunction of those two planets in like 800 years, at 0 degrees of the constellation Aquarius. So we are now fully in the age of Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, and that in the minds of New Agers, occultists, astrologers, is a return of old Saturn's reign, according to quoting Virgil's Eclogue 4, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. So you've got this idea that this god is returning from the netherworld. Wow. To bring back a golden age. I just wonder if these guys are consciously aware of this, if this is something that they're actively pursuing. Might be,
Derek. There's some very complex thinking involved with this group. So they have these gods from the dark world associated with certain star groupings, and at certain times of the year, it's kind of like that's when the portal opens in there. So they do believe in portals. They do believe that these, at least in their writings, I don't know whether the believers of the ONA believe that, but in their original writings, there's like constellations with a certain stargate and you're placating that god at a different time of year. So people have looked at like some of the smiley face deaths or whatever and tried to put them on the standard satanic, whatever, unholy days of the year. But the calendar of the ONA is totally unique and has a completely different kind of, but a very, I would say, very complex and astute analysis of constellations and times of the year where you're supposed to reach out to these gods at a certain time. If that makes sense.
And this coincides with the recent emphasis by Damien Eccles, not to divert from your book, Global Death Cult, but going back to Damien Eccles, who was featured, of course, in the book Abomination about the West Memphis 3 murders. He's recently published a book about his new discovery that the god that he's been summoning and giving him the most power is Enlil, which is another identity worn by this old entity, Kronos Saturn. Enlil was just the same entity by a different name. Right,
and you talked about that in that book. It was Red Moon Rising, was it? I remember you talked about Enlil and Enki before, right?
Bad Moon Rising. Yeah, he's shown up in a number of different books. Yeah, Red Moon Rising, another excellent book, but that's Peter Goodgame.
But what was the book I interviewed you about? I thought that was
it. Last Clash of the Titans, perhaps?
Oh, maybe that was it. Yeah. But I remember you talking about Enlil and Enki before.
Been getting into it. Well, those are two of the most important of the Mesopotamian gods, and there are those today who still are looking back to those two, and they're very important in the mythology that was created by Zecharia Sitchin, the late Zecharia Sitchin, who believed that the Anunnaki were space travelers from planet Nibiru, which is just a misreading of the ancient Sumerian texts. But the Anunnaki are... They were formerly the chief gods of Mesopotamia who, like Enlil, their leader, were sort of relegated to the netherworld where they became judges of the dead. But Enlil, under a number of different names, including El of the Canaanites, Dagon, Baal Haman of the Phoenicians, and Kronos and Saturn, again, I argue is Apollyon or Abaddon who's going to come back in the end. And I think that we're kind of triangulating on the same thing here, that you got these guys who are actively trying to bring about this return and what this entity believes is his rightful place at the top of the cosmic ladder, if you will. In other words, pushing God Yahweh off his throne.
Absolutely. I think that there's something like that, something very dark, something goes back to the Middle East and goes back into a kind of pagan cosmology, and they have to put their old god on. They have to get rid of the Nazarene, Magian. Yep. So the ONA definitely has an anti-Christian element too.
What influence do you see for these guys in the future? I mean, is it are they actually a clear and present danger to national security, or is this kind of a fringe group that as long as we watch ourselves when we're in dark places, we should be okay, at least in the physical realm, and knowing that spiritually speaking, as long as we've accepted Jesus Christ, our futures are secure in the spirit realm for eternity. But what role do you see these guys playing here in the natural in going forward?
Well, it still seems they're influential. If you had 2 deaths in Russia within the last 2 or 3 weeks associated with ONA, you have weird things popping up in Serbia. So you see this kind of underground movement through Italy. How much it's would overthrow these states. I would think that they would love to get to the point where they could overthrow national governments. I don't think they're close to that yet. However, I do think that due to the internet, due to kind of these fringe elements becoming more accessible, I think that there probably will be more and more reference to these ideas, these infiltration ideas and insight roles, just like we saw Atomwaffen, which really only started in 2015, grew to, and really they actually defined themselves as the death cult. One guy did, and who were really hardcore kind of post-apocalyptic Nazi types. And I think that their capacity for killing people, like this one kid, Giampa, killed his girlfriend's parents. This poor guy in L.A., Woodward, killed another 20-year-old guy for whatever reason. He hasn't even gone to trial yet. And then there was another couple killings in Tampa, Florida, associated with Atomwaffen. So you just see this diffusion of chaos, early death, and discord through these kind of ideas that come out of the ONA. So I'd say in that regard, very dangerous.
The ONA, and just curious to get your take on this. It just from what little I've gathered about them, I've read through your book. I've read a little bit of the news coverage of some of these guys, and a lot of what's out there is coming from groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I take whatever they put on their website with a grain of salt. But it strikes me that these guys are almost like the flip side of a coin that features on its face groups like the Islamic State. I mean, this is just sort of a white European version of the Islamic State.
I think that's fair. I think that's what happened with Mayat. He actually joined the most conservative Islamist group for at least 10 years. So that was one of his insight roles. Huh. So he really identified with these terroristic Islamists. So I think that there's correlation between them both, the ONA, and you actually saw something happen in Atomwaffen, which was very strange, which was this one guy who was a core member joined Islam, which a lot of people on their face would be like, what is a Nazi joining Islam for? But if you understand ONA doctrines and ideas or ideology, you'd be like, okay, well, he's practicing ONA ideology. At least that's what I would think. So I think that the core ideas of the ONA, of destabilization, of infiltration, are applicable to this kind of Islam and to the right-wing groups. But I think that, like I said, if you're a real doctrinaire ONA member, you're attached to the ONA's ideas of chaos, diffusion of chaos and destabilization to put in the dark imperium, as opposed to being actually a white supremacist or a conservative Islamist terrorist. Does that make sense?
It does. In fact, when you look back at World War II, you see that the Nazis and violent Islamists in the Middle East were more than happy to partner with one another.
Yeah, it's true.
So what do you hope the readers will take away from your book, Global Death Cult?
I think that there's a couple things. I think just understand that there is an underground. I think there are similar groups to this, that there are Nexians or groups that have the similar ideology or implementing ONA ideology. ONA was kind of unique in a way that they didn't have a rigid corpus, like you have to abide by this or you're not ONA. Instead, it was like very dark ideas that got spread around. So I would encourage your listeners to understand that there are some very dark ideas in the dark web and the global underground. So I would say that would be it. And also, there are very vicious cults out there that have really awful ideas that are very similar to Nazism, that they believe in they are the hand of evolution, and you don't want to get targeted by them. You don't want your loved ones to be targeted by them. I don't think that at this point in time there's over like 2,000 or 3,000 members of the ONA, but if they believe that they can cull at will and get the human sacrificial victims, and you have to get one sacrificial victim to move up past the fifth level of their septenary system, it's something that people need to be aware about.
William Ramsey, his book is Global Death Cult, The Order of Nine Angles, Atomwaffen, and the Slaughter of the Innocents. His website is WilliamRamseyInvestigates.com. You can buy the book there. You can also buy his documentary, The Smiley Face Killers, and his previous books. Again, WilliamRamseyInvestigates.com. There'll be a link in the show notes at VFTB.net. William, thank you for your research. This is a really dark subject. One final question. Researching stuff like this, Crowley, Eccles, and now Mayat in the Order of Nine Angles, how does that impact you? How does that affect you?
That's a good question. I think that, it's definitely stressful, but I mean, the Lord has brought me through all this. I mean, it's been 10 years since I published The Prophet of Evil. I think I published that in 2010. So I've been very fortunate, and I'm still here. I feel like that was just kind of something God wanted me to do. So, I just went and did it. So, but also I put out 5 documentaries. They're on my Vimeo page. So I have 2 documentaries on the Smiley Face Killers. I have Children of the Beast, Prophet of Evil about Aleister Crowley, and then Occult Hollywood. So I have all those on Vimeo if people want to check those out. But yeah, I think that it was also something that they all built upon each other, Crowley to Eccles to Mayat. So, Yeah, I don't know. I've been very fortunate.
That's kind of how our research goes too. You start pulling on a thread and you find there's a whole lot of stuff attached to it, but you're bringing it into the light and shining a light on it, and that's much appreciated, because too many Christians today don't really believe that spiritual things are real.
Derek, we are in the heaviest spiritual warfare right now I've ever seen in my entire life. We are in deep. And it's coming from a lot of different angles. So people really need to wake up out of their apathy or in the days, or they think that it's sometime in the future. It's now. The spiritual war is right now. It's not. You don't have to wait any further. There's all kinds of things going on with the jab, with these underground groups, with the movement of occultism. There's all kinds of things going on. So people need to wake up.
Yeah, amen
Christians
to that. Amen. Amen. William Ramsey. Again, William Ramsey Investigates, and I'll add a link to your Vimeo site as well. William, thanks again for your time tonight.
Thanks, Derek. Great to be with you again.
WilliamRamseyInvestigates.com. That's the website. You'll find it in the show notes. The link, that is, at VFTB.net. Straight ahead, a discount on a virtual conference from SkyWatchTV featuring some of the last known interview footage with Chuck Missler and the missing Haitians. Where are they? That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Where were you on 10/13? As the Middle East erupts in chaos, a devastating wave of terror shocks the nation. Thousands lie dead. An apocalyptic Christian cult is blamed. And suddenly, believers disappear as internment camps spring up almost overnight. Meanwhile, a deadly virus spreads. A desperate country demands answers, and only a few dare ask, what's in the vaccine? FBI Special Agent Joe Eunice follows a trail of evidence to a small town in Iowa and a young boy who received a mysterious email from God. Now, racing against time, Agent Eunice finds himself working side by side with reclusive internet broadcaster Barney Eisen. Together, they discover a disturbing truth at the center of the conspiracy. They wrestle not against flesh and blood. The God Conspiracy, a novel by Derek P. Gilbert. Get it now in paperback and Kindle from Rose Avenue Fiction. Talking the walk on an irregular schedule from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online, VFTB.net, and on social media, Twitter at View from Bunker, Twitter at Derek Gilbert. That's DEREK. You'll find us on Facebook. We've got a Facebook page there, View from the Bunker. Also, personal social media, Gab, Getter, Parler, and MeWe. You'll find me at Derek P. Gilbert. And we are just trying to distribute ourselves across the web so they can't ban us everywhere. Couple of things. We've got the SkyWatch TV virtual conference coming up in just a couple of weeks. October 15th is when it launches. This is Countdown. So titled because of the focus in recent months, well, last 4 years really, on the UFO phenomenon. I guess UAP is now the preferred term, unidentified aerial phenomena. But Josh Peck, who is now the award-winning Josh Peck, thanks to his work on Silent Cry, which won 2 Telly Awards this past season. He's got a new documentary out called The Great Deception, and it features some of the last footage from never before seen, as far as I know, interview footage with the late Chuck Missler, Noah Hutchings, and Chris Putnam, as well as L.A. Marzulli, Nick Pope, Russ Dizdar, Timothy Alberino, I'm in the film as well, but basically talking about the UFO phenomenon and addressing it from a different perspective than the mainstream media. I mean, Tucker Carlson is not talking about the spiritual aspect of the UAP or contactee phenomena. So with the virtual conference, you get access to the world premiere of the documentary, and like SkyWatch TV's previous Defender virtual conference, all videos will be released and available for you to watch on your schedule for 90 days. There's a $10 early bird discount if you order by October 10th, so save 10 by 10/10. Take advantage of that early bird discount, just $85. It goes up to $95 on October 11th, and then everything goes live, released all at once, so you can binge on your schedule beginning October 15th through January 15th. Presentations from, of course, Tom Horn. I'm doing 2. I foolishly agreed to do 2, so we'll try to get those done. But I've had the privilege to sit in on the presentations by Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Pastor Carl Gallups, Gary Bates, author of Alien Intrusion. He's the CEO of the U.S. chapter of Creation International, also the writer and producer of the film, the documentary called Alien Intrusion, which was narrated by John Schneider. Features our friends Guy Malone and Joe Jordan, who are both putting together presentations for the conference as well. Joe is the president of CE4 Research Group, which addresses the spiritual aspect of the abductee, contactee phenomena. And Guy Malone is going to be doing a presentation on cryptocurrencies and whether cryptocurrency might be the mark of the beast. Interesting, especially with news this week that the Federal Reserve Bank, or that Congress rather, has got legislation it's considering that would authorize the Federal Reserve Bank to create a, what do they call it, a CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. And it sounds like a great idea because, cash is inconvenient. Digital currency, ostensibly more secure than using PayPal or your debit card, probably more secure. The drawback, of course, is that if you've got a central government issuing, a central bank issuing the digital currency, they know all of your financial transactions. There is no more financial privacy. So that'll be Guy's presentation. But you can find out more, all of the presenters, and all of the information about the conference, and of course, a place to register at defenderconference.com. That's defenderconference.com. It has been a strange couple of weeks. This past week with the border crisis at Del Rio, Texas, just exploding out of nowhere. At least in our perception, it exploded out of nowhere. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I do this every day at SkyWatchTV, so you can follow the 5 and 10 daily news updates, which are really news commentary. I mean, we don't do breaking news. I just try to offer reasonably intelligent commentary on the news of the day from a Christian perspective. You'll find that at skywatchtv.com or the Rumble channel, which is rumble.com/skywatchtv. But best is really just get the Skywatch TV mobile app, and that way you bypass any of the gatekeepers with big tech or social media. But all of a sudden, it seemed like out of nowhere, there were 4,000, then suddenly there were 7,000, then suddenly there were 11,000, then suddenly 16,000 people underneath the International Bridge at Del Rio, Texas. And how did that suddenly happen with nobody having any heads up, any advance warning? Where did all of these people come from? And especially, why is it that all of a sudden these people are mostly Haitian? Now, I understand that Haiti has lost a lot of people over the last 10 years. They're still trying to recover from the massive earthquake in 2010. They've been hit with hurricanes and other earthquakes and just natural disasters. The government there is a mess. So I can understand people wanting to leave for better opportunities. I truly do. And according to one article I read, corporate media, a number of Haitians have come north from Brazil or Chile, where they were working on visitor visas or work visas. A number of them went to Brazil for construction jobs back in 2015 and 2016 because they hosted the World Cup and then the Summer Olympics back in 2016. So construction jobs. Haitians went there and worked and then stayed. But now they're coming north. Same deal in Chile. Apparently they went there and now they're coming north. But nobody's asking, in the corporate media, I've not seen anybody ask these questions. How did they get from Chile to Brazil or from Haiti to Brazil or Haiti to Chile? And then how did they get from those countries all the way to the Mexican border? Because that's a long way to walk. I talked about this year before last when we had the migrant caravans coming north from Honduras and El Salvador and how far it was to walk and how fast they seemed to be traveling. When you consider that, these are people who are not well off. It's not like they've got really good hiking shoes and food and water and shelter from the weather. So it just seemed really implausible a couple of years ago that these people were actually walking unassisted from Honduras or El Salvador all the way to the Mexican border, with Texas. And now we're supposed to believe that these people just suddenly showed up in Mexico from Chile. Why isn't CNN? Why isn't Fox News asking this question? How did they get to the border? Well, I think we know the answer to that. Somebody is helping them, but the question is who and what do they hope to gain? What is the purpose of bringing all these people to the border? And it's the reaction of the American media is very telling, because even the so-called conservative outlets who are critical of the way the Department of Homeland Security is addressing this, the way the Biden administration is addressing it, they're not asking, how are these people traveling from South America on foot? We have friends in Central America who say these caravans did not come through our country. I mean, countries that would have had to been traversed by these groups, if they really were walking from Chile all the way to the Mexican border, they would have had to cross these countries, and they didn't cross, they didn't go through them. So how did they get here? I'm just guessing now that somebody flew them to Mexico City, or perhaps even points closer to the border where they got out and then they started walking. They surely did not walk all the way from Chile. So who has facilitated this mass movement of people? And as of today, and I'm recording this on Friday, September 24th, it was reported that the 16,000 or more who were under the bridge last weekend is now down to about 3,000. 1,400 have been returned to Haiti, according to the corporate media today. About 3,200 are in custody, and 5,000 have been released into the country with notices to appear. A little piece of paper saying, please report to your local Border Patrol office as soon as you can. And history shows that they just don't. They're gone. They're somewhere in country. We don't know where they are. And of course, they're not vaccinated. Not that I'm encouraging everybody to take the vaccine, because we've been very critical of this, but if the government is going to insist that vaccines be mandatory for federal employees, for our military, and for any employer in the country with more than 100 employees, why are we allowing thousands of migrants into the country? We don't know who they are. And we don't know whether or not they're healthy. But those numbers that I gave you, by the way, when you start subtracting out, okay, so many in Haiti, so many in the country, so many still in custody, so many still under the bridge, about 3,000 or so, that leaves about 3,400, if my math was right earlier today, about 3,400 just unaccounted for. And yet, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas assures us that the border is secure. Well, it's easy to get angry about this, but the thing to remember is that God has not been taken by surprise by any of this. You know, and I know that there's a highly unlikely that the election results from last November were actually accurate. But again, God has allowed this for his own reasons. So how do we as Christians proceed? If the first century church could spread the gospel and turn the world upside down under the rule of the Roman Empire and with the persecution of the religious leaders in Jerusalem, surely we can persevere in the one mission that we were given by our Lord and Savior, which is to make disciples of all nations. That's our mission. And the other stuff, frankly, yes, politics is important because it affects our ability to raise our children and our grandchildren in peace. But ultimately, the one mission that we were given was to make disciples of all nations. And we can still share the hope that we have in Jesus Christ with a world that is growing darker, even when the other team is in the White House or has control of Congress. Thanks for making time out of your schedule to listen to this podcast this week. We've got one coming up in just a couple of weeks with Dr. Judd Burton. We'll be talking about, the spiritual aspect of all of these migrants entering the country. What spirits are they bringing with them? Until then, leave us a review at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which is, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Give our Facebook page a like. Our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.